Philadelphia is steep in broadcast history. From the early pioneering days of broadcasting in the 1920s to today, Philadelphia has always been at the forefront. The Delaware Valley has been home to some of the best local programming in the country, starting with the early soap operas and children's shows to pioneering the best news formats in the country. Much of it all began right here. From radio announcers to television personalities, cameramen to directors, these were the broadcasters that burned up the airwaves. These were the pioneers of Philadelphia broadcasting.
Hi, and welcome to another edition of Broadcast Pioneers of Philadelphia interview. Tonight, a very special one, another legend here in Philadelphia that I remember listening to as a high schooler in Philadelphia. I'm guessing I was in my senior year playing around on the radio, and suddenly I'm listening to Cal Big Beat Rudman in his blue denim pad. And Cal, that was you, and that was the beginning, I guess, for you and for me. Talk to us a little about how you started.
I started at the age of 15 via the school system in Philadelphia, and they ran educational programs that were broadcast on KYW, WIP, and WCAU. And they had a program during the summer called the Radio Workshop, and I was attending Central High School and had a fire in my belly to go on the air in radio. And I attended their classes and met all the famous names on Philadelphia radio, and that's how it got started.
And that's where it began, but then as I read your biography, and you folks are welcome to go to the Broadcast Pioneers website and look at Cal's biography, that you were really a school teacher and even got your master's in education.
Yes, and I also went to medical school.
A
lot of people don't know that. But as I said, I had the fire in my belly. When the voice changes and gets into a baritone mode, especially in those days, wanted to be on the air, because the famous names on the air in Philadelphia were the equivalent in town of the movie stars from out in Hollywood, household names. So that took a while. I won a top scholarship in the city, which I took to the University of Pennsylvania, and was involved in creating their radio station, which is still on the air, WXPN, and did the wiring to the dormitories and fraternity houses and so on. And the famous Harold Prince was a student there. I hung around the radio stations, and he would hang around the stage doors of the theaters, and became a legend in the world of Broadway. And one day I was hanging around WPEN, and I had made friends with the people on the air. And a man, legendary man by the name of Lou Klein. So I was 15, he was about 17. And he came out of his studio. He had his own broadcast, high school sports. And he'll tell his own story.
Well, we've actually spoken to Lou. He's told those stories, and you can see those as well here on the website. But go ahead, pick it up from there. So you made friends with Lou.
Well, he and I got to talking, and he said, he asked me, what are you doing now? I said, nothing. So you got time? Follow me. And I followed him along Walnut Street to the Widener building, took an elevator up to the studios of WFIL. And it was the Eddie Fisher Show, sponsored by Abbott's Milk. And I saw Lou whispering into the ear of a guy who apparently was the director of the show. And the next thing I knew, he called me over and they were having a quiz. And they put me online and asked me some questions, and I knew the answers. They were easy questions. And I won, and they gave me the prize, a half-dozen pair of socks.
Congrats. And you're still wearing them?
Still wearing them from Wanamaker.
Jump ahead for us to WCAM. Now you're a little bit older, obviously.
Yes.
It's what, 1959?
Yeah.
So now you're on a real radio station, and they're paying you to be there.
Yeah. And they had the position of summer relief because there were 4 DJs on the air, including the legendary Pat Delsey. And I auditioned for 3 years. And since the station was owned by the city of Camden, it was political. And the 3rd year, the job was given for summer relief to a connected guy. And at that time, especially in South Philadelphia, with the success of Frankie Avalon and Fabian and Bobby Rydell and so on, half the kids in South Philadelphia dreamed of having a hit record. And apparently some of the people came up to see this young guy on the air, and he smelled money and thought since he played records, he would know how to record. And he did, he recorded a record. But what he didn't know was you have to have a bass line in a record. And he didn't have a bass line. He didn't know any better.
A musical bass line, you mean?
Yeah, musical. And they couldn't get the record played. Even good records weren't played for reasons that everybody knows nowadays. And the family came up and they were furious. And he did the unthinkable. He shut down the station and left with the family.
His family?
No, the family of the boy who had made the record.
Oh, I see.
Well, of course, he was fired. And the program director, a guy named Jack Lamar, who was a famous announcer for the horse races at Garden State Park in Cherry Hill, he said, "Rudman, you've got the job next summer." And I went on the air, and I knew I had to be different, and I was a pretty good writer, so I wrote a whole routine for myself and went on the air with it and had many different sayings. So my routine went, "Don't touch that radio dial, cats. It's your Uncle Cal, your big beat pal, smoking in from the blue denim pad like a dungaree den, deep, 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 deep in the dingy dungeons of WCAM. We do the doo-doo play more riff-raff and boss belt and bebop than any rock jockey on a radio. Got a transmitter that's a red-hot spitter, bouncing music off the water, Delaware River like a rubber ball, guaranteed to cover all Delaware Valley."
Wow.
Now, I figured out the way a record became a hit when it first came out. After it had been rotated and played for a number of weeks, it was absorbed into the minds of the listeners. Well, I didn't have a couple of weeks, So I figured out my shortcut. And the shortcut was, so nice, I got to do it twice. I got to do it because I'm used to it. So neat, I got to repeat. And I'd play a record like Sleepwalk, Santo and Johnny, which became a top 3 record 6 times in a row.
Really? 6 times?
Yeah, and I knew that the legendary rhythm and blues DJ, Georgie Woods, the man with the goods on WDAS, Rhythm and Blues Radio, that after he played a new record the next day, 7,000 records would fly out of the store. And I had a huge African-American audience right away. I knew that. So after I played a record that sounded good to my ear, I play it, as I said, 6 times in a row, and the next day, 5,000 records flew out of the record stores.
You'd make that record?
Made many records.
And that is the real skill that turned you into the legend you are. Your ability to sense a record that was good and would sell. Is that something that came naturally to you, or you analyzed them? How did you know that this record would be good and would sell and I'll play it, and that record is not going to make anything? How do you know that?
I got the right chromosomes.
Is that it? Just in the genes?
And I believe that that's what happens with select people. The Almighty has a purpose for that person that meets his needs to level out the playing field of the general public. And the chromosomes that I got making the money, that was a purpose, and all I want to do is philanthropy. And
that's now. Back then it wasn't philanthropy, it was making a living, wasn't it?
Yeah. And little did I know that I was given this gift to make the money and create a foundation.
Okay. Cal, you're now in your 80s. Mm-hmm. If you go back 50 years, when you're talking about, to the 60s, the early 60s, well, you were in your 30s, you were pretty hip, you could tell this record would work, this record wouldn't. As you got older, and the audience stays the same, young age, there are people buying records. Mm-hmm. You know, there aren't a lot of 80-year-olds running out to buy records now. How did you manage to keep that skill as what people were listening to was changing? I mean, you could pick out the best hip-hop record now. There were no hip-hop records in 1960.
No.
How'd you stay with it? How did you stay hip? And I'm not even sure hip is a hip word anymore.
It is, and answering in sound bites, I am still too hip for the room. And that also goes with being in the entertainment industry. A lot of us never change. The way we were, we just adjust and move along with the times. Quick study.
You know, we're talking about when you were a disc jockey. Then you became, I don't know what you'd call that, a radio picker, and you start with Friday Morning Quarterback. Mm-hmm. Right. Describe that to us and how that came about and what purpose the magazine served, because there are many people who may not know about it.
I became the power in what became a $30 billion a year industry. Of course, it is no longer, but that's another whole
We'll talk about that later,
story,
perhaps.
Yes. And I started this publication on mimeograph paper.
What year was that?
1968, when I first published it. And I was able to figure out a lot of things that are under the umbrella of the word psychology. How people think and how people react. That is a gift of course, also. So people that had tried that would send the initial copies to the record companies. You know the movie, the one line, follow the money. Only that didn't work. I did not follow the money. I sent the initial copies not to the record companies, but to the program and music directors of most of the top 40 stations. And I put the hit records that I was picking on the front page. And the rest of the page was advice on how often to rotate, change rotations, more often, less often, and when to drop them. Because I picked up the skill of broadcast, of the broadcast stations pretty quickly. Quick study. So what happened, and I'll try to make this as short as possible, the promotion guys would bring the new records in each week to the program director. And they yelled, "My record's a hit," and all my records are hits. Most of them were just guys off the street who happened to have a clerk's job in a record distributor. And hardly anybody had gone to university. So I hit the ground running and realized that the way the whole industry worked, you know what happened in 1959 with the payola scandal. And I was an honest guy, and you're aware that I am honorary Deputy Police Commissioner of Philadelphia and honorary Fire Commissioner.
And an honest man.
Yeah, college and university and all of that to take money, but in the recording industry, I'll phrase it in a one-liner this way. If you got into business and you didn't accept money from the record companies, my next one-liner is, you were under suspicion of the record company executives. That's got you laughing.
Really?
And I began to realize in my life that the words coincidence, lucky, did not exist, because it wasn't just the high level of amazing things that kept happening to me, and going back to high school and so on. That's the way it was with me then. Everything fell into my lap, right place, right time, right idea, which became successful, and so on. Something was going on.
So let me ask, because I'm not sure I understand it quite. So you would say this record ABC, is going to be a hit. And you send that out to me in this newsletter, Friday Morning Quarterback. I pay you for that.
Well, I charge a subscription fee.
Right. I pay for the, to subscribe.
Well, of course.
Okay. And there's an advantage to me if I know ABC record is going to be a hit, and I start playing it sooner than somebody else?
Sure.
Why? Explain why. What's the advantage there? That the audience comes in, I suppose.
First of all, these stations, when Top 40 started, the rating service was 60–70% of the audience, particularly in Philadelphia. It was WIBG.
Wibbage, sure.
And they owned the town, and more important, the schools, junior high, senior high, and the word passed along the kids. Oh, there's this new DJ. You've got to hear him. He's funny, and all the records he's playing become hits. He knows what he's doing. And if they were listening to some other station, let's say from out of New York, WABC, they went right over to the new hotshot in town.
So they would subscribe to Friday Morning Quarterback.
Yes.
They'd know ABC is going to be a hit. They play it, and the audience comes to them.
Yes.
How did the record companies feel about that, by the way, or what kind of pressure did they put on you to make their records a hit?
With my arrival, they thought they died and went to heaven. I was the answer to all their prayers.
Because?
Well, there were 80, 90 new records every week at that time. And I'll give you an interesting historical fact. The biggest year going back for hit movies was the year 1939. Gone with the Wind, just Wizard of Oz, all the same year. The same is true when Top 40 started. The biggest year was the year I went on the air.
You went on the air, or
on the air playing records.
Oh, I see, okay.
And I could play any record that I wanted to at that time, and making hits. And every 2 weeks there was a new #1 record. I thought that was normal. Well, of course it wasn't. So I was breaking records over and over and over that fast.
It's interesting, and it puts me in mind of watching as a kid your hit parade. And there they might have the same song as the #1 song for a month, 2 months, 3 months.
6 months.
You put them off the air.
Yeah.
They couldn't keep up with a new song every week.
No, they had no chance.
Oh.
I hit bullseyes, and my percentage of success was in the high 90s. I wouldn't claim that Top 40 records for various reasons involving music and the structure of songs and the performance. You had to miss some. But they would bring in a stack of records, and I didn't know. I'd put them on cue. I'd listen to about 40, 50 seconds and threw most of them right in a circular container.
Yeah. Was there pressure on you from either the record companies or anybody else, the performers?
Oh, sure.
You know, talk to us about that a little
All of a
bit.
sudden, everybody was parachuting into the studio. I said, I'm programming the show, and I don't need you to tell me what's the hit.
And were you programming for a radio station at that time, or just for Friday Morning Quarterback?
That's the next question. When people find out that the name of my publication, which became a fancy magazine, was Friday Morning Quarterback, they couldn't understand that. What do you mean Friday morning? What is it, a football thing? Well, I had to get the publication to the radio station program director by Friday, and he made up his playlist and so on. So to begin with that term, we all know Monday Morning Quarterback. And people ask me, well, why did you make it Friday? I say, listen, if you want to make the big bucks, you got to know the scores in the NFL on Friday. Oh.
If you're making bets on football or records.
Well, it's a way to say, you ask me a stupid question, I'm going to give you a stupid answer. So it's still a business, and you're making money for your hard work. So there were other publications, and they had trouble selling subscriptions. So only the vice president in charge of the promotion department, they'd send it to him, and he would make, I call it photocopies. And they only bought the one subscription. Well, I knew a lot of science, of course, and this is something a lot of people wouldn't know. Red paper does not take ink. You can Xerox it, and it'll come out virtually all black.
Is that right? So when you printed it on red paper?
So they bought the one, and I said, "You son of a guns." And I put a very high price on it, just made up a number. Something like $275.
Per issue, or for the year?
No,
for the year.
For the year.
Gotcha.
You know, going back those days, almost everybody was poor, right? And so when they tried it and it came out black, I was called more dirty names than you can shake a stick at. Now, another area of psychology, because that's business. Every Monday, they would come into the station, the various promotion guys. There were a lot of record labels. And one by one, they would go in to see the program music director and pitch their new records.
Sure.
And they told lies, and they exaggerated and gave false information. And you have to understand, the program directors either had to buy a U-Haul or rent one because they were fired that often. You rotate a bad record many times, people march with their fingers and hit that button to another station. So you were playing with the lives of the program music director. And there was only one or two in each station. So that was a hard job to get. Rush Limbaugh used to call me from KQV Pittsburgh, and they all asked me, and he did ask me the same thing. Do you know of any program director jobs? Cal, would you call me? You went through all of that. Yeah. Get to the next level. So I told you that I sent the quarterback only to the program music director, not to the record companies. They didn't know anything about it. Shock, surprise, and each one, when they went into the program director with his records and he'd do the whole spiel, the program director said, "You mean you don't know about the Friday morning quarterback?" These guys panicked. Remember, hit record could generate 7 figures in income and create a star. That's a big deal on a one-shot.
So at what point did they get into it, or did they never become part of it? They must have shown you the records early on so you could make a decision, right? You had to play the record for yourself to decide if it was...
Well, they brought me the records, and I could, when I had time, would listen to them. But a lot of times, while another record was playing, I would put a few of them on cue and then throw them in.
And where were you working at that point?
At WCAM. This started right away once I got there.
Oh, I thought. See, and I
thought
thought
trade magazines, but they were under suspicion.
Yeah.
With a guy like me.
You were at CAM in '59.
Yeah.
Now you're
I
saying
didn't start the publication
until
I started that in '68.
Right. So, but you're still at CAM at that point.
I was at CAM, but a lot of things happened in between, and the record companies catered to me and recommended me and so on. I'll put it this way. A guy came into the studio in '59. Many did, and he had a record. And he said, "Would you listen to it, Mr. Rudman?" I said, "Yeah, I did. It sounded pretty good." He said, "Well, I'm going to tell you something. I'm sure you know about this. I brought this record to other stations, and they wanted money to play it. And I don't have that kind of money." Mm-hmm. He said, "Would you play it anyway?" I said, "I like the record, I'm going to play it." And I did. And he came up a week later, and he said to me, "I've been listening, and you're a man of your word. You've been playing it. And I do have an ace up my sleeve. My neighbor is one of the editors, and it was then the top magazine for the public, called Radio TV Mir. You found it in all the beauty parlors and so on. It was the commercial magazine. And he said, if you find an honest DJ, because at that time, the DJs picked their own music. So, therefore, he said, I will arrange to have an article about that person in the magazine. And he did. I'd been on the air a few weeks, and they did a 3-page spread. And my son, Mitchell, had just been born. A full shot of my wife, Lucille, holding the baby, and so on and so forth.
Let's jump ahead. It starts with Friday Morning Quarterback. Now there are a number of publications you've got that are still out there. Are you still picking records?
I'm rather retired. I have a Cracker Jack staff. At that time, it was all top 40. There was no rock music at the time. That didn't come along until the Beatles and the Rolling Stones in the late 60s, early 70s. And that I totally pioneered and created a separate magazine covering that.
Okay. Okay, let's get away from your publishing business
Yes.
and talk about some of the other things you've done.
Right.
Worked with Merv Griffin. Talk about that for a little bit. What did you do with Merv?
I was written up in lengthy interviews in the biggest newspapers in the United States. LA Times, Chicago Tribune, New York Post, heavy in the Philadelphia Inquirer and Daily News. And that went along for a while, and then I got a call from the Today Show, and they wanted to interview me. Now, the way it works in television, when these interviews happen, I figured out it's really an audition. They're always looking for the next Oprah Winfrey.
In that case, the first Oprah Winfrey.
Pardon me?
In your case, the first Oprah Winfrey.
Well, the next John Facenda,
right
here in Philadelphia. The next Doug Arthur, who bought his own time, so he made a lot of money. He was sold out in commercials here in Philadelphia. So I was interviewed, and I knew that the interview had to be hot. So I started the interview, and the guy that interviewed me was the guy doing the network news. on the East Coast on 6 o'clock. And I knew it was going run-of-the-mill, boring. So I figured, well, I better try some Central High School vocabulary, top level. And I said, well, I want to explain what I do, but I'll need to utilize a vocabulary, endosyllabic sesquipedalian vocabulary. So the guy looked at me, and I could see his eyes. Oh, wise guy, huh? He said, Mr. Rudman, you're obviously intelligent and fluent. What is a guy like you doing in such a sordid industry?
Records.
Music.
Music, sure.
Now, you know that I'm Killer Cal, the guy that did the interviews blow by blow and the all of that for the World Wrestling.
Yeah, we'll talk about that too.
Yeah. So the guy throws a right hand fist at you, you do the counter punch with a left hook. So you think fast on the air. And I figured, now we're playing, huh? Here comes the left hook. I said, I'm doing the same thing in my sordid industry that you're doing in yours. He turned red as a beet. And I can tell you a story. There was a guy named the Fight Doctor who was a physician, and NBC put him on the air calling the fights. Huh. And he was from Florida. And I wanted to talk to him and see him, and there was a big fight down Atlantic City, and I went there, and I went up to him, and I asked him, boy, you gave up a medical practice to do this? And he said to me, Cal, you go where the money is.
Follow the money.
Follow the money.
Is that how you ended up with wrestling? Talk to us about that. What were you doing with wrestling?
Vince McMahon is the magic name in wrestling.
Sure.
And his grandfather started it. And then his father, this is going back into the 30s, wrestling has always been big. And for a long period of time, boxing, the fights, was by far the #1 sport in the United States. For those who don't know that, long before the NFL, baseball was doing okay, but there was nothing like boxing. So after the interview, the director and producer of the Today Show called me into his office. He said, pretty smart, Rudman. His name is Steve Friedman, by the way, very famous guy in TV. He said, how would you like to come on the Today Show as a regular? And we give you 3 minutes, and you'll tell what hits are going to be and inside information. So that started.
So you broke into television. But again, wrestling. What did you do with wrestling? You were the announcer. You were.
Yet myself and another guy, they always use a 2-man team.
Mm-hmm. Tag team.
Pardon me?
A tag team.
No. I don't mean the fighting. I mean on the broadcast.
No, I understand.
Yeah, 2 guys. One doing color and so on, and they both call shots.
Sure.
Same as baseball, there are 2, and football. So I thought to myself, this TV is good. It gave me a lot of credibility and impact. And then the Merv Griffin people called me and said, would you be interested in going on the Merv Griffin show? Merv wants to make you on your field permanently the co-host. Hey, that's good. Sort
Pretty
of
good, sure.
Johnny Carson, right?
Yeah.
Great show. But he wants to do an interview with you first. Fine. So I flew out there. Merv owned his own theater, and he started the interview. And of course, he was testing me and so on. And he said, Cal Rudman, would you be able to tell us a couple of names who are big, big recording stars and concerts and so on, who are really over the hill and are no longer going to have hit records? And even tell us why their careers are fading, but nobody knows that the career is fading, except the very hip program directors who are feeling the impact of the bad records, bad records that they're making. Well, moment of truth, the bullfighter, your eyes in the bull's eyes. I know this is true of you, and this is true of myself and a lot of people. Where we grew up in Philadelphia, we punch hard to survive, and especially in that industry. I said yes, and I gave two powerhouse names.
You're going to tell us now which ones they were?
Yeah. At that time, Diana Ross and John Denver.
Really?
And John Denver had a very famous manager, and he still is a big man in the whole field, a legendary person. And after the show ran, a week later, my phone rang, and it was this manager. And he was threatening. I said, I'll tell you what, you manage a number of artists. I come from the school where you don't get mad, you get even. And you've got a big responsibility. I don't think you know much really about the recording industry. But you don't mess with the messer. And people refer to me as the Wizard of Oz, the movie. And where was the wizard in action? Behind the curtain, with a microphone and a loudspeaker.
And a lot of power.
Ultimate power. You just don't fool around with the man. And if you think you can do what I do, be my guest and see how far you get.
Well, in fairness, you have become a legend, an icon for your philanthropy. We've talked in the past about some of the generous things you've done, and so the question is, are you putting it all into a book at some point? You're going to put it all together for us so we can absorb it at our leisure.
Louis Katz just died in a plane crash. He owned the plane, and Lewis Katz did a tremendous number of things. What really struck me was the fact, with all the obituaries and all the famous people from this area, day after day after day, the papers and TV newscasts came up with new things, fresh things, new people speaking about him. He didn't have to write a book. Most people in Delaware Valley were saturated with the Lewis Katz amazing story. A lot of people would like to know, and they ask one of your first questions, how do you pick the hits? And I've answered that in the many different interviews in different ways. Oh, I get goose pimps up and down my arms. The hair on the back of my neck stands at attention, and on and on. And if I wrote a book, that's the first thing I think that they would turn to. How did he do it? Why did he do it? When did he do it? I don't need the money. And I learned the lesson with the Howard Cosell story. He had an ego that wouldn't fit into a warehouse. And he wrote one book and another book. And sometime, not that amount of time before he died, he wrote a book. And all of his friends and people that knew him, liked him, whatever, and certainly if you looked up the word controversial, you saw his picture in the dictionary there, so to speak. And he just told the stories, not very flattering, of some people that he knew very well. And then he wondered why nobody would talk to him anymore.
And you want people to keep talking to you?
Well, let me put it this way. Here's the one-liner.
Let's end it with this one-liner. Let's wrap it up.
We'll end it with one-liner. If I were, and I've alluded to what I'm going to say, and it's no surprise to a lot of people, if I wrote a book, too many people who were still living would have to leave the country.
Okay. Well, you'll never have to leave the country.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Cal, for being with us. Enjoyable. You are truly a legend, an icon in Philadelphia, and we are happy that you are one of Philadelphia's broadcast pioneers. Thanks for being with us.
You're welcome, and thank you.